Welcome to the 12th video in our series of projects using 5-inch squares or charm packs. The pattern is called Charm Thursday and requires 7 charm packs. I dug through my charm packs until I found a bunch that I thought looked really good together, except for this one spot in here where it was kind of pink, but I think I'll just leave those out and use the rest of them. Instead of following the directions as written on the pattern, I'm going to use a different method that will create the same look. For this method, I just need to organize a bit before I start to sew. I'm going to make 30 large 9 patches with 5-inch squares. If you visualize a keypad on your phone, 1, 2, 3 is the top row, 4, 5, 6 is the middle row, 7, 8, 9 is the bottom row. After you sew them together, you'll cut them in half in both directions side to side to get the 4 blocks from each of the 9 patch units. You'll end up with a big square, a small square, and 2 rectangles. In the center position, the number 5, you will want to have a light fabric. In the 2, 4, 6, and 8 positions, you'll want to have dark fabrics. In the 1, 3, 7, and 9 position, you want to have either medium fabrics or light fabrics. If you want your dark rectangles to match in some of the blocks, you want to have the matching squares in the 2 and 4 position or the 6 and 8 position. Pick out your 9 squares for your 9 patch, pin them together by row, set them aside until you have 30 9 patches that you need to sew. I had taken out the pink at the very beginning and I still had a small pile of 5-inch squares left at the end. Don't overthink it, just put a pretty combination together. When you have your 30 blocks ready to go, it's time to sew. Make sure you keep everything in order the way you figured it out. The center should be a light fabric, the corners should be medium, and the 2, 4, 6, and 8 positions should be dark. Sew them together by row. I just fed them through the machine and kept them together, and then I would cut it off the back side, bring that last piece to the front to get that next piece added onto it, and then when I was done, I would pin it back together so that I can take the set together to the ironing board. If you like using the webbed sewing technique where you don't break the thread and you just keep the pieces together with the stitching, this would be an excellent place to use that technique. Make sure that you're using 1/4-inch seam allowances throughout. I power sewed my way through this project, but this would be an easy one to just do a little bit every day. If you did 3 blocks every day, in 10 days you would have all 30 blocks ready to go. Once all the rows have been sewn, it's time to head to the ironing board to press. We're going to press all the seams to the dark fabric. I like to press to the dark because then when I'm sewing the rows together, I can nest seams together at the corners. If you want to, you could press this open, but then you don't have a place to nest seams together. I love my Oliso iron. It has a pop-up feature to lift the iron off the surface when you let go of it. There is less strain on my wrist, and I haven't scorched my ironing board or my fabric in a long time. Once we're all done with pressing, it's time to head back to the sewing machine to sew the rows together. Thankfully, I've stayed organized by pinning everything together at each step. At this point, I will generally work on 2 or 3 blocks at a time. I lay one out, set the extra row aside, sew 2 of the rows together, and then instead of breaking thread, I'll take the next block, lay that out, set one aside, and then sew those 2 rows together. And then I'll come back in, cut that first one off the back side, and then add the 3rd row at the bottom. If I only work on 2 or 3 blocks at a time, I don't get confused, and it's easy to remember which row goes with which block. As I finished the blocks, I would set them aside so that I could have all 30 blocks done before I head to the ironing board. Using this method will make the quilt a little bit scrappier than the original design. If you wanted your blocks to have a little more continuity, you could follow the directions and just make one of these 7-inch blocks at a time. Once you have all 30 of your big 9 patch units made, it's time to head to the ironing board to press. For this section, I pressed away from the center row. I have found I get the best result when I first press the seam flat and then press it in the direction I want to go. The sides will lay a lot flatter and I don't get as many ripples in the seam. You could also press this from the back side if you don't want to press from the front side. Once all the big 9 patches are pressed, it's time to head to the cutting mat. Each of these giant 9 patch blocks should measure 14 inches by 14 inches. Our next task is to cut each of these in half, both directions from side to side on the 7-inch line marking on our ruler. My ruler is 8.5 inches wide, so I'm using the 7-inch mark on the edge of the block to know where to cut. If your ruler isn't wide enough to do this, you can either use 2 rulers or you can use the 2¼ inch marking on the left seam to know where to cut. Just make sure to double check before each cut is made that you're cutting the right pieces. Now you have 4 different blocks, each with a light center, a medium in the corner, and 2 rectangles. Just another reminder to double check that you're cutting it correctly on the 7-inch line. Did I cut a couple of mine wrong? Yes, I did. So then I had to use the method on the pattern to make a few spare blocks. Once you're done with the cutting, you'll end up with 120 blocks that measure 7 inches by 7 inches. If you have to make an individual block to make up for a miscut, you need to cut 2 rectangles from one charm pack. You need to cut 4 squares, 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches from a different charm pack. And then the third charm you'll leave whole. You'll have rectangles on 2 sides and the square in the corner. The pattern directions have you make 10 columns of 12 blocks. I like to do it in rows horizontally, and so I started out by just sewing 2 blocks together, and I always made sure that the light squares were opposite each other. I just picked up 2 blocks, random blocks. The only time I put blocks back were if I had blocks that had the same exact fabric. Otherwise, I just picked up 2 and sewed them together. After the first couple blocks I got through the sewing machine, I turned the pile on my right leg upside down and had the pile by my left hand right side up so I could kind of pick them up without having to turn things over. The next thing I did was count out 12 sets of 2 to set them aside. Once you've counted out those 12 sets of 2, put them somewhere close, but not so that you'll use them, and then sew the rest of them into sets of 4. Again, you don't want to overthink this too much. Just pick 2 and sew them together. If you want to give yourself an out that if you pick up the same fabric, you can put it back, go ahead and do that. But otherwise, I just didn't even really look. I just sewed them together. Once all your sets of 4 are made, then you make sets of 8. We're just going to pick up the first 2 we grab and sew them together. The nice thing about sewing it in rows instead of columns is that you won't be able to turn one the wrong way and have to rip at the end because all the rows are exactly the same, whether they're right side up or if you flip it around the other way, it's going to look exactly the same. Well, it won't look exactly the same because the fabrics are all going to be a little bit different, but you can't sew it wrong if you sew it in rows instead of columns. Add the final sets of 2 to your rows, and then it's time to press your rows. I pressed all the rows at once, and I just pressed them all exactly the same in one direction. When you go to sew the rows together, you can alternate every other row, flip it over, and then your seams will nest. But this way, when you're ironing, you don't have to keep track of which one goes to the left and which one goes to the right. You just press them all the same way. Now it's time to sew the rows together. I did them first in sets of 2 and then sets of 4, and then I had 3 of those, and then I just sewed the whole quilt top together. When sewing the rows together, always make sure that the bottom row has the seams always going the same direction for each of the sets of 2. That way, when you sew your sets of 4 together, those seams will still nest. I'm glad that I used the method I did. I think it saves some time for piecing. But the nice thing about the directions as written is it would be easy to make a few blocks at a time whenever you have a few spare 5-inch squares of fabric. Just keep making a few every day. You can pile them up and before you know it, you have enough for a quilt top. When sewing the rows together, I did press after each of the very long seams. That just helped keep it a little bit smoother to sew together and easier to handle. Again, I tried not to think about it too much as I was sewing these rows together and worrying about what fabric goes next to where. I didn't even lay the rows out before I sewed them. I just picked them up and put them together. Another option for the fabric requirements for this quilt would be to use 3 charm packs for the large squares, and then to cut leftover jelly roll strips or 2.5-inch strips for the rectangles and the smaller squares. And of course, you can always cut the pieces from back quarters or yardage that you're wanting to use up. So if you can't find 7 charm packs in your stash that you like and that all go together, just find 3 or 4 or however many, and then supplement the rest of the fabric with your stash or leftover strips. Once the quilt top was done, I layered it with batting and backing on my long arm quilting machine and quilted it in a light blue thread. It seemed to blend in with all the different fabrics. I used a very simple stipple design for the quilting, and I like how you don't even really notice the quilting until you get right up close to it. For the binding, I picked out a fabric that was in one of the charm packs, just a nice blue that would go with everything all the way around the edge. Blue, yellow, and green is such a classic color combination, and if you look close, you can even see a little bit of that hot pink I tried to get rid of. For the backing, I picked a blue floral. It's just a very small design, and it has a little bit of a gold metallic in it. I just thought it was really pretty and would be a nice complement to the front of the quilt. And now a quick update on the number of charm packs I have. I started with 59. I used 7, I gave away 4, and then I bought 7. So I'm now at 55. So at least I'm down by 4. We hope you remember to hit the like button, leave a comment for us, tell us how you're doing on your charm packs, share with your quilting friends, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and happy quilting!